So we've been preaching through the series I Am. We first started in the Old Testament and how God used the words I am to describe, the writer used the words I am to describe God, and his name was considered. You ever see in the Old Testament the capital letters L-O-R-D for Lord? That is the name of God, or Yahweh. That word Yahweh, the word itself means I am who I am. Or the word sometimes is used Jehovah. So we've already been through all of the Old Testament. You've memorized that whole list, right? Perhaps not, but so we have this list here, starting from Exodus and moving down to Ezekiel, all the different names for God. And it describes who God is and who God is and what He does. There's many names here of God, and they're wonderful names. They are Hebrew words, each of them. But I don't understand what those words means, and that's okay because it's a Hebrew name. But if we look at here right after it, we've described it in English. So God explains who He is for the people of Israel. And in the New Testament, Jesus does the same thing. He says, I am, and then describes a number of different things. So far we've talked about in John, I am the bread of life, I am the light of the world, I am before Abraham was. I am the door, the gate. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And I am the true vine. So all these things we've used to describe, Jesus has used to describe Himself. Next week will be the last week, just to let you know. So how many do we have so far? Today, so far we have 14. Next week will be 15. And it'll be 15 sermons all on YouTube. So if you missed one, you can go back and watch. You mean you haven't been taking notes for all of this? You're a lousy student. Very sad. No, of course, I'll do that for you and I'll copy it. But only for you. Others, I'm not so sure. If you want a copy, just let me know and I can get you one. Wait till the final one, it's easier, and then I'll give it to you if you want. So far we've been through 8 in the book of John, and now today is going to be the 9th. So where are we in biblical Israel here? So Jesus was born in the north, in Galilee. He was raised in the city of Nazareth, which is right in the same area there. He was a carpenter, the son of a carpenter, and he worked in that area, and then he began his ministry. So where did he begin his ministry? It was in Galilee, of course, and we know the first miracle that he performed was when water turned into wine, and then he started his ministry after that. He traveled quite a bit from the Galilee in the north to Jerusalem in the south. And Bethany, right next door, town just next door, it was over the mountainside. And so if you know, imagine Jerusalem is over here, and you have to go up the side of the mountain, and then down on the back side of the mountain there was the city of Bethany. And his friend lived there. Who remembers his friend's name? Lazarus, that is correct. And he had two sisters. What were their names? Mary and Martha. So he went there quite a bit and spent time with them. He took a break after a while, but we're going to talk more about that later. So last week, we started in John chapter 15. Jesus said, I am the vine. Where did Jesus say that? Where was he? Upper room? No? He was walking from there up the mountainside on his, to John chapter 14. We show he was on the way where he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. That was the last thing he said in the upper room. And then when they were finished, they started walking. And he was talking with his disciples on his way up the mountainside. He probably wasn't walking fast, but he knew the time was coming. So he knew what was coming ahead. He knew it was going to be less than 24 hours before he was going to die on the cross. Jesus was walking and talking with his disciples and explaining all these things to them. And he said, I am the vine in John chapter 15. And he continues in John chapter 15 in verses 16 and 17, in chapter 16 and 17. He prays while he's walking. If you notice in chapter 15, 16, and 17, it's all in red letters in the Bible. So because Jesus is continuing to talk. And they keep walking and finally arrive and to the river named Kedron. It's a little creek. So they crossed over that and they started going up the mountainside. And they stopped. Anyone know where they stopped? Not at the top. It's probably about halfway up the mountain. They stopped in the garden there, and the garden was called what? The garden was called Gethsemane. And that's where Jesus prayed. So we're going to pick up the story there in John chapter 18. John chapter 18, Jesus was speaking all these words with his disciples over the brook of Kedron, and he entered the garden with his disciples. Jesus went there quite a bit. Mark, how do you know that Jesus went there in the garden? We know Jesus prayed a lot. Now I want you to go back with me for a little bit and think about this. Jesus was in the upper room and with his disciples. One of them took off and left. Why did Judas leave? He was going to betray Jesus, right? Now Judas took off and went to the soldiers, but where did he go first? he probably went back to the upper room again and brought the soldiers with him so they knew exactly where Jesus was. But the upper room was empty, and so he thought about it for a while and thought, so Judas, what does Judas do next? We don't have time to look for Jesus, so do we go back north, or where did he go? So as Judas thought about it, he realized, I know where he went. How did Judas know where Jesus went? It's because Jesus went to the garden often. Mark, you've got to be making that up. So if we look at verse 2. And Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place. For Jesus went there often with his disciples. It wasn't a one-time thing, that one-time visit to the garden. He went to the garden always. On the way from Jerusalem over the mountain to the city of Nazareth, he always stopped in the garden to pray. Judas knew that. And Judas said, I know where Jesus is at. He said to the soldiers, follow me, and we'll go get Jesus in the garden. John doesn't give us details about the garden and about Jesus and all those things about his disciples sleeping, or that Jesus was there for 3 hours sweating blood. It doesn't say anything about that in the Gospel of John. Maybe John was sleeping, I don't know, but maybe he was sleeping and that's why he didn't write it down, but John doesn't give us those details of what happened in the garden. But in the next verse, he does say, Judas showed up. Judas, after he had received a band and officers from the chief priests there in the garden, and they came with weapons, but do they have guns there? No, they didn't have guns. They had swords, right. Knives as well. Probably a spear. So whose soldiers are they? They are Roman soldiers, that's correct. Or is that correct? No. They weren't Roman soldiers. They were Jewish soldiers. Why Jewish soldiers? They weren't guards specifically. They were not the king's soldiers, nope. You have to remember at that time, who was the government of the Jews? It was the Romans. They're ones that were the reigning king, and the king there had the soldier. And what was his name? His name was Pilate. He was the Roman governor there, and he had the soldiers. Was that right? Yes, he would have soldiers there. So the soldiers would have been there during Jesus' miracles, but at the same time, the Jewish soldiers were there also. Why were the Jewish soldiers there? Notice where the soldiers were from. The chief priests and the Pharisees. So you have to understand Jewish culture. the Jewish system of government had two branches. One was the king. Now that was Rome now, but you also had the religious branch of government. And they had the priests, and they had the chief priests, and all those that studied, and they had soldiers as well to protect and to enforce the laws. We were kind of like the police of the Jewish culture. So they have their police officers and their system set up. That's who these soldiers were that came with Judas to get Jesus in the garden. So Judas showed up with police, and what happened? You have to remember that all these people are, Judas and the police are showing up, and the Jewish police are showing up with torches and lanterns. Did Jesus have a light there? He had probably a mag light, one of those big ones on his shoulder. No, he didn't have that. They didn't have those back then. Jesus didn't have any torch or lights or anything like that. They just knew the way. They didn't need to depend on the light because they knew how to get there. They're in the garden while it's dark, and the police and Judas are coming into the garden, and Jesus knows what's happening. And Jesus calls out to them, "Who are you looking for? Who is it that you want?" And what did the soldiers say? "We're looking for Jesus of Nazareth." That's who we want. When Jesus answers him, what does he say? Jesus speaks to them and he answers them and he says, "I am." He says it in Hebrew, in the Hebrew language, just so you understand that. When he says, "I am," that was in the Hebrew language. That is the name of God. He essentially answered the police, "I am the name of God." When they were looking for Jesus of Nazareth, and his answer was, "I am God," what was their response? They came up, asked for the Jesus of Nazareth. He says, "I'm God." "And who are these people with you?" You call the cops bad, or you call the Jews bad cops? They were good soldiers. What did they have? They have weapons, probably swords. They were heavily armed to the teeth. Did Jesus have a weapon? They had two weapons, two swords. The Bible says that in another place, but they had two swords. But these guys over here have lots. Jesus of Nazareth. "I'm God." And they fell backwards and fell to the ground with fear. Were they scared of God? They were terrified, like they were hit. Why were they scared? I mean, they had swords, they had spears, they had armor, all these things against two men in a garden with no lights. Why were these guys scared? It was simply the name of God, the power in the name of God. Jesus said, well, I asked you, who is it that you're looking for? So this reminds me, hang on a second, we have a story in the Old Testament. So we're going to put this New Testament story on hold. Anyone remember David? When he fought Goliath? Anyone remember that story? How tall was Goliath? Anyone remember? He was 9 feet, 9 inches tall. Roughly, about that. How tall was David? Maybe 5'5", 5'6", maybe 5'9" at most. He was not 6 foot. You can see David looking up at Goliath, and Goliath just stepping up to this short man with armor on his thighs, covering his waist and his stomach and chest. And he was just stomping up to this little man David with a huge spear, huge sword tucked in his belt. David walks up to Goliath with a little shepherd's staff and looks at Goliath. And Goliath just laughs at David. You come to challenge me with a stick? I'm going to feed you to the birds. Be prepared to die. David said, you come with a sword and a spear with armor. I'm just going to let you know that I come in the name of the Lord. And the Lord of hosts and God's army of Israel. And this day of the Lord, you will be in my hands, and I will strike you and cut off your head, and I will give you your bones to the birds that have gathered. And all the earth will know that God is in Israel, and you have nothing. And the whole world will know that the sword and the spear doesn't matter, because this battle belongs to the Lord. And He will give you into our hands. And Goliath scoffs at him and says, come on, let's go. And we know what happened. I've been practicing for this my whole life. He takes his slingshot and throws the stone and hits Goliath in the head and dies. And David wins. And I think about this when I look back at the story of Jesus confronting Judas and the soldiers that come. And his answer of, I am the Lord. And fear struck the soldiers as they came, because they knew and feared the name of God. They weren't just a little bit afraid, they were terrified of the power of God. So Jesus was in the garden. Again, he said, "Who are you looking for?" I imagine their voice to be shaking when they say, "Jesus of Nazareth?" I already told you, I am God. There, if you want me, let them go. What was Jesus doing? He's taking care of his disciples. He didn't want them to suffer. So he says, I'm the one you want, I'm ready. He holds out his hands for them to arrest, and the others go and scatter. This was written to fulfill those, what was spoken is, I have not lost any of those that you have given me. Where's that quote from? Does anyone know where that's from? So recently we're in chapter 17, right? Jesus was walking with his disciples, talking to the Lord and praying. And he was praying for his disciples. I've been caring for my disciples so far, but when I am gone, you have to care for them. I haven't lost any that you've given me, except one, the one son of perdition, that was Judas. I took care of all the ones you gave me. And Jesus continued to pray. Now Jesus was in the garden, and he was still defending them. But one of them had a different idea. Now is the time. I told him that he was going to die, and he was going to fight to the death. And he's excited. He said, I'm ready. The time is now. He told me I was going to die. I'm going to fight. And he pulls out his sword and strikes. And that was Peter. And he does this and strikes at the group that had come. He strikes at the high priest's servant. And he cut off his ear. Probably because he's lousy with a sword, but he should have gone for the head, not the ear, but anyway. His servant's name was Malchus, and we know that because Jesus told Peter, now is not the time. Put your sword away. This is the cup my Father has prepared for me, and I accept it. I will drink it. What kind of cup is Jesus talking about here? Cup of suffering. What kind of suffering are we talking about? Jesus is talking about death. The curse of sin that Jesus is going to accept. Jesus knows what it means that they're going to kill him, and yet he still drinks this cup and accepts that he will die for his disciples and the soldiers as well. Jesus knows this is bigger than himself, bigger than his disciples, and bigger than the soldiers. It is universal salvation. And he accepts that. You know the rest of the story. Jesus is taken and nailed to the cross and put in the tomb. That fear that the soldiers responded to Jesus with as he announced that he was God. They have seen Jesus' miracles. They have seen what he can do. They've seen how much power Jesus has. Could he kill me with his eyes? Do you think they wondered that? How much power can Jesus have? I will go with you. I will accept that I will become that sacrifice. My death is for you. So what about you? Are you seeking Jesus? What does it mean to seek Jesus? So we have the soldiers seeking Jesus, but how do we seek Jesus? Do you knock on a door and look for Jesus? Oh, do you knock on each door and go to the next door and then talk about Jesus? Do you find Jesus as you go knocking on doors? Where do you find Jesus? I'd like to show you the Word. We can read it. Have you read the Bible? No, not really. It's too hard. The English words are too hard. Maybe you're not looking for Jesus hard enough. Who's played hide and seek before? I love playing hide and seek with my kids. My best and favorite game to play with the kids. All four, they all understand the concept. The youngest one, he's not quite perfect at it, but he knows how to hide and then comes out and kind of misses the point. But sometimes I have to try not to find him. Where's Ethan? And he's right there, I'm just looking around and acting like I don't see him. I go look in the other room, and he follows me, and where's Ethan? Oh, there he is, and I found you. You can't find Jesus that way, just so you know. You can't walk around pretending not to see anywhere, and then, wow, that was lucky. I finally found Jesus. It doesn't work that way. It's hard work. You have to open the Bible. You have to read through its pages. Where is Jesus? And you keep looking and searching. Requires work, you know. Requires time. You know, I'm a professional at hide and seek because my brother and I used to play. We were really good at it. My younger brother's name, Eric. Just so you know, he's not like me. He's thin. He finds his way into these tiny little spaces. And there's no way that he can be there. It's impossible. And sure enough, that's where he's at. And so he's a professional at hide and seek because I'm looking for this guy for 20 minutes and he is curled up in the tightest little space. And finally, when I track him down, when I give up, he comes out and I say, "Where were you?" He said, I'm not going to tell you where I was because I'm going to use that same place. That searching requires work, time, and a little bit of effort. Finding Jesus the same way. We need to look and pray and spend time with the Father to find Jesus. So number 2. Do you know who Jesus is? That He is the I Am? Jesus is not simply a story. He's not just a Bible character. He's not an actor in a drama. No, He is real. He is truly God. And He loves you. Sometimes we can be floored if we think about God really loves me. God truly loves you and He died for you. Number 3. Do you need His power more than your sword? Mark, I don't have a sword. Do you need God's power more than a gun? Do you need God's power more than money? Do you need God's power more than food? What about your breath? The breath in your lungs. Do you need God's power more than that? I do. I need His power. I desperately look for His power. I encourage you to do the same thing. Lastly, number 4. Will you trust in Him when the hard times come? Or are you going to scatter and run away like the disciples? The disciples came up and saw Jesus being arrested, and they took off. They took off and left. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. Not one of them stayed there. Later they come back. John shows up at the cross. We know that, which is good. But all the disciples scattered. Will you scatter when the hard times come? Will you quit? Will you just give up? Or will you blame God for something? And just break that relationship and move on? It's too hard. It's too much work. It's too much to overcome. God, I trust in You. Number 1. Trust the Lord and be saved. If you've never been saved, I encourage you to call and beg for salvation today. I beg you, don't leave this place without making a decision for Jesus in your heart. Number 2, trust Jesus for power in your everyday life. Not your weekly life. Not Sunday life only. Maybe Sunday and Wednesday, is that enough? That's enough Bible for me, just Sundays and Wednesdays, right? Once a week, twice a week. That's enough to just eat it twice a week, right? That means 2 meals a week. Is that good enough? Who will admit to just only eating 2 times a week? Anybody? Careful. Careful, I've seen you eat. Do we like food? Do we like the Bible? Number 3. Trust Jesus even when the hard times come. I know some of you are going through a hard time right now. I understand that. It can be tough. You feel heartbroken, you feel lost when you've lost someone. Sometimes when sickness comes. Problems at home, maybe separation, problems with finances. It's time to look to the Lord. One of my favorite Psalms. David wrote it. So I look out on the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. He has the power to say, "Let there be light," and there is light. We can't say to God, "You can't help our problem." He has the power. Jesus has the power. Why not ask Him? He's right there. Ask Him for help. We look for help all over the place in vain. Again and again we look for financial planning, for counseling, for our behavior. We go to the doctors and we search and we look for help everywhere we can. We take medicine to help us. And yet God is right there, looking at us. Waiting. Impatiently. Come on, people. Ask for my help.
Amen. Amen.
We must trust Him. It doesn't mean everything's fine and rainbows and all that good stuff. It won't happen that way. But the point is to trust the Lord. He's on our side. How can you lose? If you have the Lord on your side, you win every time. God always wins. We've never lost yet with God. It's best to trust in Him. So let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank You for Your word. We thank You for Jesus and His life. We thank You for Jesus' words, "I am." I love this story. How He's sitting in the dark, praying in the garden, just praying as sweat like blood is dripping from his head. And He says, "I am," to these soldiers, and they're struck with fear. And they just lose it. May we trust in your power, Lord. We need you. I pray for the people here today. If they don't know salvation and they don't know you, if they don't daily seek you, may they do that. May they start to trust in you. When the hard times come, to trust in you. May we feel confident and bold, strong, because the power of God is with us. Because you are the I am. Thank you, Jesus, for your word. It's in your name we pray. Amen. So I'm asking you to stand this morning.